trade professionals. This was, it's a rocky start for us, or it's a rocky end for me here. We're back with another news roundup, and this might be a messy one because I just spilled all my coffee, and I'm in a hotel room, so that is, I will definitely clean that up. I will. Anyways, hi Lalo, hi Andy, how are you guys doing?
Good morning or good afternoon to you.
Good morning.
Are you caffeinated yet?
I've had my first cup of coffee. I need probably a few more to get myself going.
Oh, good. You, Lalo?
Don't drink coffee, so...
no. You don't. You have your tea. You have your chai tea or something.
I had my tea. I had my black tea, so...
That's good, like the English do. I only drink decaf. Today I forgot. I went to Starbucks for the first time in a year, and I was like totally jumped back to where I was a year ago and didn't order a decaf. And so I was like, oh, it doesn't matter. I could use caffeine today, and I'm going off the rails, I think. Like, that's why I almost spilled my coffee. Thankfully, it wasn't over my computer. Another story. Yeah, that's good. So we have 3 articles today. Pretty interesting. Good stuff. Good questions from me. So let's jump right into it so we don't make it too long for you guys. Hopefully you're on your commute maybe to work, or you're already at work and enjoying this little news podcast, right? Getting caught up with the news is great. So the first article we're going to go into is forced labor, which is a huge topic nowadays. And it says it is everywhere. Rooting out forced labor from supply chains. And I agree, it is everywhere, right? We've seen it just pop up everywhere, and people struggle with it. People don't even know how to handle it. I've heard, or I've, from working in compliance, you kind of hear that stuff. So this article kind of says that having a clear view of the supply chain and collecting data can help identify areas where forced labor is happening, and mostly building trust and collaboration between companies and suppliers is essentially to tackle this issue. So my question kind of is why, this is an easy question, like why supply chains are vulnerable to forced labor, but how are they vulnerable to forced labor? Like how could they miss potentially that there is forced labor? Because now that we know that it's such a big issue, how can people still miss it? Or is there big ways to miss it? Like that's my kind of question.
Well, I'll start off because I know Andy has a lot more information, but in general, traditionally, if I'm building something here in the US, I'm building a widget or something and I need parts for that, not widget, I'm sorry. I'm building a something that has widgets in it. And traditionally, I just buy that widget. I don't normally go and get the information of who makes that widget. I'm sorry, not who makes, who helps that widget maker make that. In other words, it only goes one level deep. In other words, traditionally, that's the way it's always been, where I know who my supplier is, but I don't know my supplier's suppliers. Only because the supplier does not want to disclose that, because I can bypass that supplier and go and get stuff directly from other people at a cheaper price. I don't get the markup and everything. So that has traditionally been the reason why companies like me, I'm the final manufacturer, do not know what is going on in the supply chain. I never know if, it could be child labor, it could be slavery, it could be whatever, it could be a straight up fair labor, and it's not, there's not an issue, but I tend to never know that, unfortunately. And like you said, Anik, now with forced labor, not only forced labor, because we're seeing also in green trade, you want to go down through your supply chain to see how efficient or green is that product so that you can claim it as credits towards your product. So anyway, that was just my 2 cents worth on that, on why I feel this is now a problem. And, kind of just to answer your question.
I don't want to interrupt you, Andy. I know you're going to jump in. But question, so like to me, forced labor, I know it's very different, but country of origin is kind of the same concept, right? Because there's a supply chain, and sometimes people get the country of origin wrong because there is a long supply chain and they're not looking further because they might be more parts, which might change the country of origin, right? So like I feel like it kind of connects to the same way of going about it, because forced labor is could be hidden. You don't see it obvious. You don't see it very obvious. Like it's not, you look at the paper and you're like, oh, they have forced labor. There you might have to look way deeper than just having the information in front of you.
Well, but you all right, but I think you've got two issues. I appreciate where you're looking at saying maybe country of origin is related to the.
No, I'm not saying it related. No,
okay.
I'm not trying to say it's related. I'm just saying it's the way to figure it out is hard, because sometimes finding your country of origin is more complex than you think, and obviously finding forced labor is complex.
Well, because you'll have components of an item that item still manufactured, let's say in India or China or Italy or wherever it's manufactured. That component may be, but then when those components and the most common example of this is like a bicycle. You have the tires made in one country, the rims of the tires go on made in another country. The chain is made somewhere, the frame's made somewhere, the pedals, the brakes, etc. When it all comes together, then all of those items that are classified individually are then transformed, and it's called a substantial transformation. That now the classification of that is now a bicycle instead of tires, or instead of rims or bicycle rims or parts thereof. It's now a bicycle. So there's that scenario. But this article, I got to say, it was a well-written article. It's by the way, it's on Supply Chain Dive, and it's the reporter here is Ben Unglesby, and if I mispronounce that, sir, I apologize. But in looking at this, there's a couple of things here that I was looking at that it makes mention. All right, in today's world, why do we keep talking about forced labor? It's basically slavery, right? It's modern day slavery when we're talking about forced labor. The forced labor appears to be in China, India, Indonesia, Turkey, and the U.S., believe it or not, as we're looking at that. And the U.S. is still considered the country that imports the most goods that could be considered at high risk being manufactured from forced labor. There's a lot of, quite frankly, sweatshops and things of that nature. That's where that forced labor comes from in reference to the U.S., according to the, what is it here? The human rights group that's called Walk Free on global slavery. Anyway, the point being, as we're talking through this, here's what's happening is that this article emphasis on trying to root out forced labor is a case where people are going through, I love the term audit fatigue. And you're trying to, if you're importing goods and whatever, and you're trying to reach out to your suppliers, you're trying to get more information from them, and they're not willing to share some of that. And it's getting to the point where it's just difficult, where people just aren't responding in some of these suppliers. And then what do? And you still have to bring in product, and you're trying to find a new source for it. It's just going through that. It is much more extensive. Your supplier may be fine, but their suppliers may be the one where the forced labor is. So it's like a tier 2 or tier 3 or third level of supplier. That's what's coming into play in this. And the ultimate importer of the finished goods comes in, and customs is, will bust them out or whatever. And it's getting onerous in trying to find all this stuff. And it's just like audit fatigue is a good one. But you know what? That's where you go back to what we keep saying. Lalo and I both keep telling, vet your suppliers, vet your products, and do your due diligence on the front end, because it'll be much easier to find out that kind of stuff on the front end than on the back end when customs issues you some kind of a CF-28, CF-29, which is a formal inquiry, or some kind of penalty, or seize your goods, and then you have to prove it otherwise. And so it's better to get it done on the front end.
Okay. Well, you've heard it here. So moving on to the second article, does not have to do with forced labor, but it does have to do with Russia, which is not doing great things, always trying to bypass sanctions. Hence, the title is How a Dark Fleet of Ships is Helping Russia Evade Oil Sanctions. So I remember we did talk about the dark ships, and it was kind of a crazy concept to me that that's even possible, because I don't know, it's just crazy because it's 2023, it should not be happening. But anyways, there's so much stuff happening that goes beyond our daily lifestyle. So ultimately, Russia has utilized trading firms with no industry history to handle the oil trade, replacing major oil companies. So these firms export large volumes of Russian crude to Asia and then cease operations, leaving no traceable paper trail. Insanity. So what are the potential consequences of Russia using these dark fleet on a global oil markets and the prices? I think we did touch on that last time, that it could potentially rise, right? But I mean, if they can bypass sanctions this easily, why do we have sanctions in the first place?
Well, I mean, you've got to take a step towards it. But there's two things with this that we've talked about. One was, again, these are, when we're talking about dark fleet or dark ships, what it means is all of these ships out there that are on the ocean, they have transponders on them that show that connect up to satellites that shows their physical location out on the sea. These dark ships, what they do is they turn off those transponders. So they go dark, as it hints it is. They go into the Russian ports, they fill up with Russian oil, they come out, and then they transload from one dark ship to another ship with the Russian oil, but that second ship then goes in and is selling the Russian oil out on the market as if it were from a different origin country. So that's how they're doing some of that. The other side of this, though, is with the currency. Remember, we talked about the issue where China and Russia both have been pushing to replace the U.S. dollar as the international currency of exchange. And they're trying to replace it with the Chinese yuan or whatever else, maybe the Russian ruble or whatever. The reason they're doing that is it circumvents the Western banking rules. So that's how they are able to get away with it. They're not paid in U.S. dollars. They're paid in Chinese yuan or something else, some other currency. Therefore, they bypass these sanctions and are able to keep their oil going.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go with the last article, which is okay. So ultimately, what this talks about is that rail is projected to become the optimal mode of transport, surpassing other options such as trucking. The article mentions that this shift is primarily driven by factors like cost efficiency, increased capacity, and environmental sustainability, which Andy had a few things to say about. Now that I'm reading this again, I thought about, trucking. There's obviously a lot of traffic, certain stuff where emission, is that what you call it? Emission from them? Yeah, right? Yeah. From the truck might even be more excessive, because when there's a rail, I mean, they have a straight shoot, right? They don't have, I mean, there might be other rails and they might have to wait a second or something somewhere, but ultimately they don't have much traffic. So it could be like, and there's maybe faster routes, possibly. So maybe it could be more environmental sustainable.
It's where rail comes into play is from a fuel efficiency perspective per pound. There's no doubt rail is a very efficient mode of transportation. And, as far as moving, freight from one end of the country to the other and whatnot. So it is definitely, now it's slower than truck. It's a slow mode of transportation because, you're moving through and whatever. And you say slower, is like you were saying, they have a straight route. Yeah, but your freight's going to be on a container. It's got to move from one, rail yard to another, all that kind of stuff, and then get swapped around. Okay, fine.
And it still has to go on a truck, right? I mean, it's still
at some point the final delivery.
That's what they call the last mile delivery. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
I see.
With that, it is a very fuel efficient way of doing it. Now, what's driving that is there are more and more companies that are looking to try and do this carbon neutral effort and offset their, carbon emissions and all this other kind of stuff. And all that's fine. I mean, rail is just a good, efficient mode of transportation, and all that. That said, it also, the more use of rail helps keep that same cargo off of the highways and all. But again, your final mile of delivery or whatever still comes in play. So you're still going to use trucking to move it out, or it comes in by ocean, then you're going to rail, then you're going to truck. All said and done, it's a very fuel efficient way of doing it. Now, one of the things in this article that we're talking about, excuse me, is they were talking about also CSX was trying to look at becoming more, I guess, carbon neutral in their efforts. What I find with that is you still have to have those big engines that are pulling the, all the containers and all that. So with that, with all the cars coming in, that's where your fuel efficiency comes into play. However, apparently CSX is looking at using technology to try and see if they can't improve some of their own efficiencies. Like in the train inspection portals, it gives reference to. But the other one I found interesting is the development of possibly use of hydrogen with locomotives. So that's to me, that's a possibly a good thing. Hydrogen use is outstanding. Basically, you're running on water, where they can split out the hydrogen atoms versus the oxygen, and use the hydrogen to power the locomotive and all that. If that comes to fruition, then that's a good thing. But overall, I think it's just use of rail, folks. That's just a fuel efficient way. If you can plan that into your supply chain, it's going to take a little longer, just like using ocean over the water versus air cargo. Using rail to move it is going to be more effective than just truck across the way or air cargo as well.
Well, it is a projected industry trend. And from that, I do thank you for your input, by the way. And for that, I'll have to say that we will be talking about industry trends and recent trends as well in our upcoming free webinar with Renee. And this will be December 13th. This kind of isn't an ad because it kind of reminded me of this, and I wasn't going to put this in, but here I am. I will be there, be a party of industry trends, basically. So show up and maybe, get some knowledge while still having a great community joining the webinar. And it'll be like a light webinar. Don't see it as like overload of information. It's more like maybe understanding things a little better. So we hope to see you there. You can sign up on globaltrainingcenter.com. We're going to put the link down below. But I have to wrap this up because I know I want to stay under 30 minutes. So I have two more articles that I kind of want to touch on real quick. One that's more of a statement is that the customs broker user fee is due February 9th. There you go. Don't miss it. So that's the due date for payment of the annual customs broker permit user fee. So there you go, which will be 174.80. Yeah. Yes, there you go. Euros, dollars, whatever. And then this is kind of crazy. So Yemen, Houthis, how do you say that? An Iran-backed rebel group seized a cargo ship in the southern Red Sea and say they have taken it to Yemeni port. What the heck?
Yeah, it's Yemen's. It's the Houthis. The Houthi that was reported in where there's a group that operate out of Yemen that is an Iran-backed rebel group, seized a cargo ship in the southern Red Sea, and they have moved it into a port in Yemen. So again, this is with the scenario here with what's going on this comes into play where, again, the activity in that Middle East is in turmoil and whatnot. I will say, here's one of the things that comes in. A lot of folks are really, frustrated with things going on all over the world. And I'll just tell you that generally speaking, when the U.S. itself is considered strong and the U.S. economy is strong, it actually the rest of the world is benefits, and there's strength in other countries as well. The other countries benefit as well. When the U.S. is considered having a weak administration, and the U.S. economy is weak, look at what the effects are, and that you go back in history, and the rest of the world is weak. Or there's turmoil and things of that nature. And so in this particular case, Iran seems to be behind it, and it's a group that's it's called the Houthis that's operating out of Yemen. So, if you've got supply chain sources that are coming out of the Middle East, you better start looking at alternatives, because more and more of this kind of activity is going on right now. So,
yeah, okay, yeah. So I just wanted to bring that up. I mean, it's an interesting article to read, and maybe if you are doing business in that area, it should be looked up. Anyways, we're going to move on to some interesting facts, which I really hope that, I didn't say this fact last time. It's because I'm using a list and I'm just browsing from the good facts I used. So this one is, the United States depends on trucks to deliver nearly 70% of all freight, including both manufactured and retail goods. That's a fact, and we kind of talked about this. And
70%, you said?
Yeah, 70%. Wow. And then, okay. I think I don't know if I said this.
Well, it's a salute to our truckers.
Oh, there you go. So, Christmas, we buy a lot of stuff, and then people are like, ugh, I don't like it. Or they secretly don't like your gift, and then they return it behind your back. Could also be happening. And USPS is predicting a 19.6% increase in returns this year. Hopefully you're not the person that returns it secretly. But anyways, we've made it under 30 minutes, guys, so you can get your morning commute and be at work and, have all this knowledge and share it with your friends. And also share with them that they should be listening to this podcast, because why are they not? This is it for today. So again, follow us, and thank you for listening, and let us know on LinkedIn what you think. And yeah, bye. Have a great day.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest in the show, or would like to sponsor Simply Trade, or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.